Today I am talking to you about Creed. Welcome back everyone. Today I want to talk to you about a couple of Creed fragrances that I have been trying over the past several months really. There's 4 of them and they're sort of the more feminine floral ones versus the oud ones or the men's ones, and I definitely do not have a Ventus in this list today. So when I first tried these fragrances, I was so tempted to buy them. This was probably last year, mid last year was when I first tried some of these fragrances, and I was so tempted to buy them, but I didn't because, well, they're expensive obviously, and so I really wanted it to be a very considered purchase. And so I've been getting samples of them for several months now, and I think I have come to the conclusion that they are not for me, which is not a bad thing. I'm just very relieved that I had the good sense to really take my time with sampling them, because what I sort of got from them at the very start is not really what I get from them now. So the first one I want to talk about is Spring Flower, which I didn't realise had been made for Audrey Hepburn originally in the 1980s. Fragrantica lists this as being a 1996 release, so I'm guessing that perhaps it had been made for her and only she wore it until it was released in 1996 after her death. This one I actually really liked. So this one for me opens like a fresh watery flower garden, but there is an aquatic note in here that's very evident in the opening and in the first stages of the fragrance, which I don't love. But the florals in here are very pretty and coy and playful, and so if it weren't for the aquatic note in the opening, I would have loved it from the very start. As it dries down, that aquatic note does dissipate and the florals become far more prominent, which is a good thing for me. There's an apple note in here as well, which I don't get so much in the very start, in the very top of the fragrance, but I do get it as it starts to dry down, and it just brings this beautiful crisp tartness to the fragrance without it being super sour like you would get with, say, a rhubarb note or something like that. There is peach in here as well, but I don't get that quite so much as I get the apple, I don't think. But in any case, there is definitely a fruity element to this that makes it very light and very feminine. Overall, I found this to be a really pretty fragrance. It's dressed up in a pink bottle, which is very appropriate for the style of fragrance that it is. The longevity was okay. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't fantastic. And once I got past that aquatic kick in the opening, I really started to enjoy this fragrance quite a bit. The next one I want to talk about is Fleurissimo. And now Fleurissimo is the one that was worn by Grace Kelly at her wedding. I always get this one mixed up with Love in White, because I always thought Love in White was the one that Grace Kelly wore, but it wasn't. It was Fleurissimo. So this one surprised me because when I read the note breakdown, I just assumed that I was not going to like it. The opening really surprised me on this. It is a beautiful creamy white floral opening with some citrus in there as well, and just a tiny hint of the ambergris that I know is in there. And the ambergris is what made me think, oh, I may not like this fragrance, because ambergris can be a very marine type fragrance, and those types of fragrances really don't gel with me at all. However, within about half an hour, the ambergris has amped right up and the florals have taken a step back, and it's become very salty, very sharp, quite screechy, and I really was not enjoying this part of the dry down at all. In fact, I really did start to feel like I was getting a headache. There was a white musk element as well that was coming through with the citruses, and it was all just kind of a bit clashy on my skin. I'm not saying that the fragrance itself is clashy. These elements in the combination that they were in just did not work on me. And as I've said many, many times, fragrances with aquatic notes or marine type notes really just don't sit well on my skin at all. As it dries down further past that 1.5 to 2 hour mark, it becomes quite clean and soapy, and that ambergris is still there, but it's not as salty and marine-like as it was, you know, sort of in that mid. It pretty much stayed the same for me after that. So that slightly salty, kind of clean, musky, soapy vibe that I was getting from it pretty much stayed the same on my skin, and then it just, you know, it just became more and more faint as the day went on. The longevity on this was very, very good. I think it lasted well into the evening. I could still smell it on my skin when I jumped in the shower that evening. So I had been wearing it all day, and I could smell it all day too because it was projecting off my skin. So again, when I was in that part of the dry down that I really wasn't appreciating very much, it was quite unpleasant because I couldn't escape it. It was definitely, you could smell it. The last two that I have here are Love in White and Love in White for Summer. Love in White surprised me a little bit because it actually was more, I was expecting it to be more of a creamy white floral, and just because of the name, I suppose, but in fact it has some really citrusy elements in it, and particularly orange, I think. And whilst I have mentioned before that I don't really gel so much with, say, mandarin notes, the orange in here is really, really pleasant. And again, like the first two, there is definitely an aquatic element to this fragrance. It's quite watery, white musky, very clean smelling, but fairly unremarkable, really, for me. There was just something about it that didn't really work for me. And I'm beginning to understand that perhaps Creed fragrances aren't for me, because there is, I don't know if it's the white musk or if it's the aquatic elements that they use. And I know that they're really famous for their ambergris. It doesn't work on my skin, unfortunately, or fortunately for my bank account, perhaps. I believe this one is the fragrance of choice by Michelle Obama. And whilst it is beautiful, it just isn't for me. However, it would be a great fragrance for someone who enjoyed musky, clean scents, slightly watery scents, and wanted it to not be too projecting and too loud. So it'd be fantastic for the workplace. So if you are going to make an investment in a bottle that costs as much as these fragrances cost, then perhaps it's a good one if you can wear it pretty much on a daily basis. For me, it didn't last very long, and in fact, it was a common thing between this one and the Love in White in summer. They both didn't really last very long. In fact, within about 30 minutes of spraying it on my skin, I couldn't really smell it anymore. And I've been through, these are the second vials that I've had of these particular fragrances. And so I have worn it, I've given it a decent wear, and yet I still don't really gel with it. However, the thing that I did like about these is that aquaticness about them isn't super prominent. So it was relatively unremarkable for me, but I enjoyed wearing them. There was nothing in them that made me sort of go, don't like that. And they weren't headache inducing either. Out of the two, I preferred Love in White for summer, and the reason being is that this one is definitely more woody. The orange peel note has been switched out for bergamot, and I find that the initial blast almost smells vetiver-like to me, but I think actually what I'm probably smelling is the cedar, and the citruses aren't as sharp perhaps as they are in the original Love in White, because that bergamot is a little bit juicier and more rounded versus the orange peel. There is still ambergris in here. It's still largely an aquatic, watery, floral, musky scent, and it definitely has white musk in it, which is clearly the trademark DNA of these Creed fragrances that I'm talking about here today. When it comes to the dry down with these two, I find that the Love in White for summer is possibly a little bit sweeter than the Love in White. I think the fruit notes seem to linger a little bit longer in the Love in White for summer than in the Love in White. So I possibly like the dry down of Love in White more, and the opening of Love in White for summer. If I could get those two melded together, it might have been the perfect combination for me. But overall, I wasn't disappointed with these fragrances. I think they're really beautiful, but again, there was nothing really, making me go, wow, I really need to own this fragrance. I really want to be able to wear it all the time. But the irony of that situation is these are the types of fragrances that you could wear all the time as a signature scent, because they're so wearable and they're not offensive in any way. Arguably very good quality. Does the quality match the price? I don't know. That's up to you to decide once you sample them. But I could totally see people, choosing these fragrances for summer weddings or as a daytime scent for work and things like that. So overall, I enjoyed these fragrances. The first two, those aquatic notes, really just didn't work for me at all. But the Love in White ones, I really quite enjoyed, but I really just wasn't enamored enough with them to warrant parting with that much money. So that was my mini overview of these Creed fragrances that I have been trying over the past year or so. Again, I could have sampled many more from the range, but these were the ones that were easiest for me to get hold of, and I was able to get several samples of them so I could actually work through them properly. I've concluded that for me, as I mentioned earlier, I don't think Creed fragrances in general work for me, because I think that musk and the ambergris combination that they seem to have in all of their fragrances doesn't really work for me. I don't hate the ambergris, but I also don't love it. I'm a bit ambivalent towards it, and you don't want to be spending that money for ambivalence, really. Anyway, I will leave it there. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.